I'm Sarah B., and this is Time and Other Thieves, reflections and conversations on the nature of existence.
It's mysterious, it's ancient, it's wise, but what is it? You know?
It is the I Ching, which I'll be talking about today with my friend Suni Pillay. If you listen to the 18th episode of this program, which aired back in October, you got to meet, so to speak, Suni's spouse, Leif Johnson, who shared some of his knowledge on the Big Five personality traits. I met them both through my husband, who used to work with Suni, and the four of us have been friends for at least 4 years now. The I Ching has come up in conversation in a few of the many dinners we've shared in that time. My husband, Whitman, consults the ancient oracle somewhat regularly and has since I've known him, going on 15 years. Whenever I hear coins hitting the surface of a desk or table in 6 separate instances, separated only by a silence long enough for jotting down a straight or broken line, I know that Whitman has something on his mind and is seeking guidance for how to proceed. It's kind of odd that I've only consulted the I Ching once, as far as I can remember, despite Whitman's influence and my being someone who appreciates divination in general. I've just gravitated more toward tarot, I guess. But I've wanted to know more about the I Ching for quite some time, and I thought it would be fun to have Suni teach me some stuff, as she uses it even more frequently than Whitman does.
I use it daily, sometimes multiple times a day, sometimes obsessively.
And she therefore knows it really well. Not in a scholarly sense per se, but in a practical and reverential sense. She even has all 64 hexagrams memorized. Suni can look at 6 straight and broken lines stacked on top of each other and tell you what name and number they correspond to. If you are new to the I Ching and have no idea what I'm talking about, I will clarify soon. And if this episode inspires you to give the I Ching a whirl, you'll quickly see how impressive it is to have all 64 hexagrams memorized. Not that Suni gloats about this skill. Not at all. And as for how she got introduced to the I Ching,
I was introduced to the I Ching by my guru, my family guru, when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I was in India. I was sitting in his room, like where he has all his books and his desk and stuff like that, and I was just sitting across from him. I was like the American.
Suni's from Chicago, with roots in Kerala, India.
On vacation. Didn't have much to do. Just sitting around a lot at the ashram. And he's like, oh, just take out the I Ching there. He's like writing a letter to somebody about something. And he's like, I just want to know the prospects of this such and such a thing that I'm doing. And he's like, just open it to a page. And so I did, and I read it, and that was my very first experience with it. And he told me that opening it without like this divination was fine. And for a long time I was doing that. But I've done pretty much all the ways except the yarrow stalks, which is like the traditional way that consulting the I Ching has been done.
For this conversation, Suni and I met at her house on top of a mountain in Swannanoa and sipped herbal tea up in the finished attic space, Suni's newly carpeted room of her own, where she likes to work on her novel, between consultations with the I Ching. We sat facing each other on the plush, pristine white carpet with a teeny tiny table between us, like the kind used for eating breakfast in bed. But before we started tossing coins on this table in search of answers from the I Ching, I asked Suni to provide some historical context on the ancient oracle.
The I Ching is arguably the oldest continuously published text in the world. I don't think it's like for sure known, but it's definitely thousands of years old. And it's one of the 5 canonical books of China. It's a major, major book. It might be the most important book of ancient China. Today, however, post-communist revolution in 1948, I think it's still important, but I don't know that people talk about it as much. I don't know that it's like overtly a part of people's lives, but I think it's still very popular in China and East Asia in general. But as far as the ancient connection, there's a sort of a mythological figure named Fu Si, who thousands of years ago was supposed to have created the I Ching. Mm-hmm. And there's the whole mythology behind it.
According to a book called The Taoist I Ching, translated by Thomas Cleary, Fu Si is the first of 4 authors that the I Ching has ever been attributed to, and he was living circa 3000 BCE. It's also been attributed to King Wen, a leader from the 11th century BCE, and to his son, the Duke of Chao, and also to Confucius in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE.
Confucius was one of the primary editors of this text. It seems unclear what he did exactly, but he compiled and edited the text. During the Confucian period of Chinese history, the text became super important, and it, beyond just a divination tool, it became more of a way to understand the universe, like a cosmological tool. So both, actually, for Confucianism and Taoism, it's a primary text. Mm-hmm. So in China, there are like 3 sort of streams of spiritual identity. And so the very, very first one was like Chinese folk religions. That was before even Confucianism and Taoism. And then you get Confucianism and Taoism, and then Buddhism, and then the Communist Revolution. Allegedly, Mao Zedong consulted the I Ching quite regularly, which is kind of interesting because they were trying to dismantle the old culture, but that's one that stuck. Scholars have spent so much effort and time trying to figure out how this book came about. Basically what I'm trying to say, it's a very complex, very ancient text, I think on par with the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita for China, except there's no moralistic teaching, there's no Godhead, there's just reference to change. I mean, it's called the Book of Changes. It's constant change. It was important to me to give the historical context because I feel like this is a book that's been so misunderstood and appropriated by so many people in the West that I feel like that Chinese perspective, like where it evolved from, is just so important. And the more I look at that ancient world of China, it's so fascinating. And so as far as the I Ching in the West, I think the person that really brought it was Richard Wilhelm, who was a sinologist, a German sinologist who lived in China for like decades. And he loved China. He studied under Chinese tutelage, and he took this, painstaking process to translate one of China's canonical books, most important, arguably. His translation came out in the 1920s. So this edition is called the Wilhelm Baines edition. So I believe Baines was the guy who translated it from the German. But Wilhelm is the guy who, with love and care and admiration for the Chinese culture, brought this book to the West. And then Jung, as you know, wrote the foreword, which is very interesting and definitely worth the read.
And I did indeed read that foreword in preparing for this episode of Time and Other Thieves. Jung wrote it in 1949. He said he was already somewhat acquainted with the I Ching when he first met Richard Wilhelm in the early 1920s. The 2 men would become friends, and Wilhelm not only confirmed for Jung what he already knew, or you might say felt, about the I Ching, but also helped deepen that knowledge significantly. I'll talk more about what Jung himself would come to know about the I Ching after Suni goes into a little more detail about what it actually is, the process and structure of it.
There's 3 layers to the I Ching. So the bottom layer is the lines, right? It's the hexagrams and the trigrams. The hexagrams are composed of straight and broken lines.
Okay, so when consulting the I Ching, you throw 3 coins up in the air at the same time, and depending on how those coins land, heads or tails, you get an even or an odd number. Heads count as 3, tails count as 2. An even sum represents a broken line, while an odd sum represents a solid line. So you end up drawing 6 lines on the page, and these lines comprise the hexagram Suni's talking about.
The other thing that's really important to know is that the straight and broken lines are yin and yang. So the sort of the male-female energies that was so integral to the ancient Chinese worldview. The straight line is a yang line, and the broken line is the yin line. The hexagram and the trigrams are the first layer, and then there's the statement or the judgment that comes with each of the hexagrams.
So once you've determined which hexagram your coin tosses represent, there are 64 in all, you consult the book, whatever book you prefer, be it the Wilhelm Baines, the Taoist I Ching, or Whitman's Preference, a 1992 translation by Brian Brown Walker with the subtitle A Guide to Life's Turning Points, and you read about the meaning of that hexagram, initially in a poem-like snippet of cryptic text called The Judgment.
That's the second layer. And then the top layer is like all these other texts, these like from disparate philosophers and rulers and things over time that added all these commentaries. So you combine all those 3 layers and you get the I Ching. If you're using it as an oracle book, then I think it's kind of requisite to come at it with a sort of reverence and not as a parlor game. And for me, that has yielded the most accurate readings, hexagrams, that I've received have come from like a place of thoughtfulness and earnestness. But even then, I mean, sometimes it's fickle and you won't get the answer that you think you need. But you do need that answer at the time. The I Ching has a unique voice, and I can ask a question, and if I don't like the answer, I can try to like ask it again and again, but you're going to get locked out, in a sense, because the answers are going to become less and less satisfactory to you. Mm-hmm. And that's just the case. That's just always been the case. So in my experience and a lot of people's experience that I've read about, the answers are very indicative of almost a personality.
But all this implies that the I Ching, a book, somehow knows when it isn't being used properly, which I guess we should hope is the case if we're assuming it somehow knows, for instance, how we should proceed with a major life decision. Carl Jung addresses what Suni was just talking about in his foreword to the Wilhelm Baines I Ching, saying that he can understand the very Western temptation to ask the same question over and over again as a way of testing the oracle's validity. He allows, and this is also indicative of a Western mindset, that any number of answers to his question are possible, and that perhaps another answer would be just as significant as the single one he happened to get. But that single one is the one he got, and to ask the same question again, quote, would have been tactless, and so I did not do it. The master speaks but once.
One of the things I think Jung was saying in his foreword was about something about chance, right? So the universe is perpetually in motion. And when you roll the coins or throw the yarrow stalks or whatever you do, you are getting sort of a snapshot of a moment in time. But then the next moment has changed, right? So, but like in this moment of time, and so the way I like to look at it is this moment in time, and I've asked a question, and the answer are like the chances. Like, what are the chances, or what is the likelihood of such and such a thing transpiring? And then the answer will be something like, well, the chances vary from this to this. So if I get a hexagram that is very positive, and I get a changing line that is very positive, then I'm going to read that as, oh, the chances are pretty good that this is going to happen. But I don't think it's ever like, it's never going to tell you 100%, right? It's just going to give you the likelihood, the chance of something occurring.
Is that typically how you ask a question, how you word it? is chance?
I word it in like an open-ended fashion. So so if I have a job interview, let's say, thank God I don't. How will my interview go tomorrow? And that I'll ask like an open-ended question like that. But I find like if it's in my heart, if it's something that I'm really feeling like pressing, then that I'm going to get a more pointed answer. But if it's just some sort of vague thing and I don't really know what I'm looking for, I'll get a pointed answer, but it'll be for something else and I have to dig a little bit to find out. Like I could be getting scolded. The I Ching can scold you. There's hexagram 4 is called, according to Wilhelm, youthful folly. And that when you get that, it's like, I told you once. And you're an idiot for asking again.
The master speaks but once. And yes, Suni is right in her recollection of Jung's foreword in that he says a great deal about the role that chance plays in not just the I Ching, but the Chinese mind in general, or at least the ancient Chinese mind that the I Ching is channeling. He says that this mind, quote, seems to be exclusively preoccupied with the chance aspect of events. He differentiates between the Western mind, which worships causality, and anything we can, quote, carefully sift, weigh, select, classify, and isolate, and the Chinese mind, which seems wholly concerned, not with causality, but coincidence. What Suni referred to as a snapshot, Jung conceptualizes as synchronicity. The hexagram in question coincides with the moment in which it's received by the querent or coin tosser, both chronologically and in quality. As opposed to the concept of causality, synchronicity, quote, takes the coincidence of events as meaning something more than mere chance. That coincidence is inherently meaningful, representing, quote, a peculiar interdependence of objective events among themselves, as well as with the subjective psychic states of the observer or observers. And in this uniquely Chinese conceptualization of the moment, objective events include everything, down to the smallest detail. So for super-rational skeptics, consulting the I Ching can be, if nothing else, a way to look at the world as ancient China did. Or according to the Taoist I Ching, it can be approached as a tool that helps one observe and understand the anatomy of events, which in turn, quote, forms a basis for living in harmony with the pulse of existential time.
It might be interesting to show you what I asked the I Ching last night. My question was, what do you think of my humble efforts to know you?
You being the I Ching?
Yes, being the I Ching. And I got the hexagram 46, which is pushing upward. And that means like a slow, steady growth, like a seed pushing up from the ground. So I got 46 with the changing line, the second changing line from the bottom. And that line is, true and confident, so it is fruitful to make the summer offering. And so that changes into hexagram 15, which is integrity. So I took that to mean that my humble attempt at knowing the I Ching and talking about the I Ching is good. I'm doing it the right way.
Suni just mentioned that a hexagram she received changed, which points to another significant aspect of the I Ching that we haven't yet touched on. When any of the lines of a given hexagram have the value of 6 or 9, it means that they are especially important in the interpretation of that hexagram. They are said to be changing. As Carl Jung puts it, these lines have, quote, an inner tension so great as to cause them to change into their opposites, that is, yang into yin and vice versa. So a straight line with the value of 9 will change to a broken line, while a broken line with the value of 6 will change to a straight line. And when any lines are changing in this way, an entirely new second hexagram results. You'll hear this phenomenon in action now as Suni and I consult the I Ching together. My question had to do with my desire to have more time for creative pursuits. namely the writing and producing of this radio show and converting already existing episodes into podcast format, and my plan to therefore cut back on the amount of time I spend on my job as a psychotherapist. So my question was, what are the chances that shifting my focus from career stuff to creativity stuff will ultimately benefit me? And then I tossed some pennies.
You got 2 heads and a tail. That's a straight line. That's a yang line at the bottom. Okay, now we have 2 tails and a head. So that's a broken line. It's a yin line. And then we got another broken line. We've got the bottom trigram here. And then we've got another broken line. And then we got 3 heads, which is a straight line changing to a broken line. Okay, so one more time. So here we got 3 heads again. Mm-hmm. And we've got a straight line, which is changing, right? So it's changing to broken. So now I have 2 hexagrams. Your first is increase. So this is 42, and then is changing to 24, which is return. So these are the 2 lines in increase that are pertinent. I already know that 5th line is very, very, very good. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at the trigrams, you'll see that this bottom one is Chen.
The bottom trigram, by the way, according to the book The Taoist I Ching, represents the inner state of the person asking the question. And for me, in this particular instance, that trigram was Chen, or the arousing, thunder. Without reading any text or judgment related to this trigram, it resonates with my inner state, where my question is concerned, inasmuch as I do feel aroused, and not in a sexual sense, but in a waking up sense, in a liveliness by my creative pursuits. In consulting the Wilhelm Baines I Ching, I see that Chen represents the eldest son, quote, who seizes rule with energy and power. And that also feels like what's happening inside me. Right now, my creative ambitions want to take all control from my professional ones. In consulting the Taoist I Ching, I gasped upon seeing its very succinct description of Chen. Practicing introspection in action. I mean, that is exactly what I'm doing with this radio show. So while the lower trigram represents the inner state of the querent, the upper one represents the outer state or environmental situation. And in this throw, my upper trigram was
Sun, the gentle wind.
This also seems fitting, given that my outer state or environment is not at all harsh or demanding right now. I'm currently lucky enough to have the choice to work less in the professional realm. And as Suni said, these 2 trigrams, Chen and Sun, put together, create the hexagram 46, which is called increase. And the judgment for that hexagram is, it furthers one to undertake something. It furthers one to cross the great water. So just with this message alone, the I Ching seems to obviously be telling me that I'll be served well by focusing more on creative stuff than professional stuff. It's also worth noting that Wilhelm says this hexagram expresses, quote, the fundamental idea on which the Book of Changes is based. To rule truly is to serve. Now, I already serve people in my professional work, but maybe that doesn't really count because I'm getting paid for it. Whereas with this radio show and podcast, I feel like I'm not only serving listeners, or that is my hope, and not getting paid for it, but also serving my highest self. Wilhelm says, when people are devoted to their leaders, undertakings are possible, and even difficult and dangerous enterprises will succeed. I can think of no better leader than one's highest self, and come to think of it, this radio show also allows me to practice devotion to other leaders, i.e. the various philosophers and theologians whose ideas I've made it my mission to disseminate on the airwaves and internet. But there's still my first hexagram's changing lines to consider. My 5th throw of the pennies resulted in 3 heads, which totaled a value of 9. And some people, including my husband, don't even look at the overall judgment for a hexagram that's changing and will only read what its changing lines mean. Jung acknowledges this in a footnote of his foreword, saying that the Chinese only interpret the changing lines, but that he himself finds all of them to be applicable in most cases. My 5th line, as Suni already mentioned, was very good,
9 in the 5th place means, if in truth you have a kind heart, ask not. Supreme good fortune, truly kindness will be recognized as your virtue. True kindness does not, and this is the commentary on that line, true kindness does not count upon nor ask about merit and gratitude, but acts from inner necessity. And such a truly kind heart finds itself rewarded in being recognized, and thus the beneficent influence will spread unhindered.
But then there's that 9 at the top.
9 at the top means he brings increase to no one. Indeed, someone even strikes him. He does not keep his heart constantly steady. Misfortune. Now that sounds scary, but oftentimes this is like a warning. And if I don't quite get it, I go to the James DeCorn's Gnostic Book of Changes, where he has all the compilations of all the commentaries, all the main ones, to see maybe like a different translation or to see like other ways that it can be interpreted. Here's what it says about that top line. The meaning here is that through renunciation, those in high place should bring increase to those below. By neglecting this duty and helping no one, they in turn lose the furthering influence of others and soon find themselves alone. In this way, they invite attacks. An attitude not permanently in harmony with the demands of the time will necessarily bring misfortune with it. Confucius says about this line, the superior man sets his person at rest before he moves. He composes his mind before he speaks. He makes his relations firm before he asks for something. By attending to these 3 matters, the superior man gains complete security. But if a man is brusque in his movements, others will not cooperate. If he is agitated in his words, they awaken no echo in others. If he asks for something without having first established relations, it will not be given to him. If no one is with him, those who would harm him draw near.
So what I take from all this is that I should keep my priorities balanced, not try to accomplish things too quickly, and keep being mindful about how I express myself on this show, especially before I have a solid base of listeners, lest I inspire those who would harm me to draw near.
So yeah, you're blessed with that line 5, but here's line 6 giving you a warning. Mm-hmm. It's not bad. It's just,
well, bad things happen.
Yeah, bad things do happen, and the I Ching does not shy away from that, from the darkness in life.
As for the hexagram that this first one, increase, was changing into, that was hexagram 24, fu, or return, the turning point. Comprised of the lower trigram chin, the arousing, thunder, and the upper trigram kun, the receptive, earth, its judgment was.
Return, success, going out and coming in without error. Friends come without blame. To and fro goes the way. On the 7th day comes return. It furthers one to have somewhere to go.
I get the impression that the I Ching says this a lot. It furthers one to have somewhere to go, which I translate in this case to it benefits one to have something to do, to have some concrete goal, a metaphorical destination you're trying to reach. I give myself such a goal every week with Time and Other Thieves. But if it weren't this, it would be something else because I love having projects, and I know in my bones that it furthers me to have them in my life. And as for what the I Ching says about going out and coming in, maybe it's suggesting that it's good for me to step away from my creative projects regularly and focus on my career, so that I always have those projects to come back to. To and fro goes the way.
It's almost like those 2 lines aren't even necessary, like the increase isn't even necessary, but it's like kind of nice to know that like you are on the right path in returning to your true self.
This sort of message is pretty common with the I Ching. According to Brian Brown Walker, in the intro to his 1992 translation, the I Ching consistently counsels us to embody the following qualities: modesty, awareness, acceptance, adaptability, compassion, restraint, innocence, perseverance, tolerance, reticence, devotion to inner truth, patience, openness, detachment, conscientiousness, balance, and inner independence. And on the flip side of this coin, pun intended, the Book of Changes urges us to let go of fear, anger, desire, arrogance, aggressiveness, anxiety, harshness, cunning, goal orientation, and self-indulgence. It's a running joke in my house every time my husband consults the I Ching that I will afterwards guess what it advised him to do. Nothing. It pretty much always tells him to do nothing. And yet I think it helps Whitman to receive that message again and again. And it would probably help most people to receive that message, hell-bent as most of us are on doing something all the time. And of course, the I Ching isn't saying we should lay around all day and get nothing accomplished. It's referring to aggressive action, to trying to change a situation so it's working in our favor. Sometimes the I Ching will say that action is needed, but I bet the majority of us Westerners, conditioned as we are to problem solve and seek justice and defend our rights, could more often than not benefit from at least waiting a little longer before taking such actions, to practice the pause, as they say in mindfulness circles. And also, who doesn't need to be reminded of the importance of modesty, compassion, patience, detachment, balance, etc., and of the harm that fear, anger, arrogance, and self-indulgence can cause. These and other themes were definitely present in the other hexagrams that Suni and I received on the day that we consulted the I Ching together. After I asked the I Ching my question about creativity and career, Suni posed a much different kind of question to the oracle.
Now, I don't often ask these types of broad questions. All my questions are usually very, very personal. But this is an anxiety that I have, and I think all of us have, at least, the people who are really thinking about what's happening. So I'll ask, what do you think of the state of American politics right now?
She tossed the coins 5 more times, resulting in 2 hexagrams.
The first hexagram that I received is conflict. That's hexagram 6, and we'll go through that in a second. And then it changes to the gentle, 57, the penetrating wind. Okay, so let's look at this.
The gist of this hexagram is that you, which Suni and I interpreted to mean America, need to practice a cautious halt and resist acting on the influence of inferior emotions. We need to be more neutral and detached, stop recoiling in anger and condemnation, and wait calmly until the sage, which one can interpret in various ways, including God, the higher power, the self with a capital S, provides the correct solution.
Okay, so let's look at the lines that are changing. So we've got the 3rd and the 4th line that are changing. 6 in the 3rd place means to nourish oneself on ancient virtue induces perseverance. Danger. In the end, good fortune comes. If by chance you are in the service of a king, seek not works. Okay, 9 in the 4th place. So this is the other changing line. One cannot engage in conflict. One turns back and submits to fate, changes one's attitude, and finds peace in perseverance. This refers to a person whose inner attitude at first lacks peace. He does not feel content with his situation and would like to improve it through conflict. In contrast to the situation of the 9 in the 2nd place, he is dealing with a weaker opponent and might therefore succeed. But he cannot carry on the fight because since right is not on his side, he cannot justify the conflict to his conscience. Therefore, he turns back and accepts his fate. He changes his mind and finds lasting peace in being at one with the eternal law. This brings good fortune. To obey the one above brings good fortune. That's another way to say it, according to Wilhelm. The good fortune will result from obedience to superiors, which stems from cherishing the ancient virtues.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of, the Constitution and
Yes.
our ideas on democracy and what that should be.
And holding fast to those ideas. Yeah. The other translation that I like to read is R.L. Wing. And so he says, keep a low profile, stick to established methods and traditional virtues. Do not put yourself in a position of prominence whatever you imagine to gain in prestige. Material possessions and status mean nothing now. Only your inner worth will be valued to you. Returning to a sense of dignity and inner worth, coupled with an acceptance of your fate, will bring you peace of mind and good fortune.
Dignity and inner worth. This message reminds me of the notion that one should not try to change others, but focus on how they themselves can change. As I'm interpreting it, the I Ching is saying that we direct our dissatisfaction outward and create conflict in our environment that's actually a reflection of our own internal conflict, a lack of inner worth perhaps, which is something we must tend to in that realm. Also, in regards to this hexagram, conflict, it's interesting to recall the Taoist idea that the bottom trigram represents the querent's internal state, in this case water or the abysmal, which the Taoist I Ching describes as dangerous, and the upper represents the external environment, in this case heaven or the creative. Is this an example of the I Ching drawing attention, as Jung said, to some unsuspected other aspect implicit in the question, suggesting that our external environment is actually comparable to heaven right now, with the upward moving energy of the purest creativity behind it? It shouldn't come as much of a surprise that the second hexagram we received regarding the I Ching's thoughts on present-day American politics was hexagram 57, or Sun, the gentle, the penetrating wind.
And the judgment here is success through what is small. It furthers one to have somewhere to go. It furthers one to see the great man.
What was that referring to, the great man?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's a really good question. You know, and sometimes I know who the great man is in the context of the question.
Maybe this is referring to the good in everybody, even though they might like Trump?
You know, like, when I just look at these, I think the only way to resolve the conflict is through this gentle penetration. And Confucius, so he was a politician, so a lot of these images that he relates are political. So he says, repeated wind trigrams show the repetition of governmental orders. The dynamic fifth line has penetrated to his correct central place and carries his will into action. The magnetic first and fourth lines obey the dynamic lines above them. Hence, it is said that there will be success in small matters. This hexagram can also symbolize humble submission and devoted service, thus suggesting the role of the ego in the work.
Humble service. Remember that idea from earlier, which is so central to the I Ching? To rule truly is to serve. Don't concern yourself with political turmoil, the I Ching might be saying. Don't take part in the fighting and ego-based outrage and othering. How are you serving your fellow humans? The energy we put toward conflict could instead be put toward helping others on a small scale, toward humble and devoted service, cleaning up our side of the street, to use some AA language. I agree with Suni that the gist of this I Ching answer is,
sure, anything in time gently can change.
look at small pieces you can change.
Yeah.
Instead of American politics.
Right. And that's a really good point in that, like, that was a very broad question. And the more pointed your question is, the more specific your answer will be, the more specific the hexagram will be.
And in this case, it seems like the hexagram is telling us to think more specifically by focusing on the small matters. An example, perhaps, of the I Ching being cheeky in its evaluation of our question and how it was phrased. Suni also picked up on this cheekiness when she asked a question regarding the novel she's been writing for the past 10 years and some change. She asked the I Ching what it thought of the progress she was making on her book, and it basically said, in its razor-sharp focus on the present moment, that she wasn't making any progress right now because she was too busy asking what it thought. It advised her to tend to the matter at hand, in this case her book, quickly and simply with humility.
That's accurate. It's not like super deep, but I think it matches the seriousness or lack thereof of my question.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, the question was serious, but it wasn't like a pressing thing.
Right.
So yeah, this is a lifetime
Totally.
of knowledge, at least. You
Yeah.
know? There's just always, I'm learning always. And sometimes you'll ask a question, but in your heart, there's another pressing thing going on that maybe is not at the conscious level. And then you'll get an answer. You'll get the right answer. I mean, it might not address the question that you asked, but it'll address something that's necessary. I mean, it's mysterious, it's ancient, it's wise, but what is it? You know? Because I know there's oracles in all cultures, but this is something more, you know? And that's why, like, coming to the I Ching with a frivolous attitude will get you that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, if you're gonna play, you're not gonna respect me, well then I'm gonna zip my mouth. And I'm not gonna tell you what you need to know. Or I'm gonna tell you what you need to know, but it's not gonna be the answer to your question.
Right.
I asked, what do you think of me talking about you on Sarah's radio program? And I got hexagram 21, which is called biting through. And the image is this. It's two top and bottom teeth trying to bite through something really hard. The connotation of this hexagram is like punishment, you know, because the image, biting through, gnawing, the symbol of mastication and punishment by pressing and squeezing. So whenever I get hexagram 21, I'm like, oh God. But there's always a good line, right? So I got the good line. I got line 5, which is, bites on dried lean meat, receives yellow gold, perseveringly aware of danger. Confucius says she will possess every quality appropriate to her position and task. But, you know, giving me hexagram 21 was kind of like a warning.
Yeah,
you know, it's like, you're
right.
not that good. So it changes to Chen. 25. 25 is, it's like, oh, you know, like, don't just, innocent behavior will reward you. You know, don't, it's not that serious. Just childlike innocence about the whole thing.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was really
I hope
fun.
it was fun and not too
It's super fun. I could see why you get kind of addicted
yeah.
to the process.
But it's built in that you can't get addicted, because if you keep asking the same question or the same, like, about a guy or a relationship, and you just want it to be a certain way, it's gonna just tell you the same thing in different words, and then it's gonna close shop, and then it's not gonna tell you anything, and then you're done.
Yeah. And I myself am just about done for this week's episode of Time and Other Thieves, Reflections and Conversations on the Nature of Existence. I'm Sarah B., and I want to reiterate my appreciation for my sweet friend Suni Pillay for speaking with me and guiding me through some I Ching consultations. If you'd like to ask it some questions of your own but don't have any of the books on hand, Suni highly recommends the Gnostic Book of Changes online, which you can find at jamesdecorn.com, and Corn is spelled Korne. And if you just want to read more about the I Ching, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a very informative section on it. I actually asked the I Ching a question regarding the topic of next week's episode, which is going to be about climate change. Yes, I've already done an episode on that topic, but I'd say it deserves revisiting. And this time I'll be using Daniel Sherrill's 2021 book, Warmth, Coming of Age at the End of Our World, as my springboard. But the question I asked the I Ching was, what can you tell me about the coming century in regards to climate change? And I received hexagram 18, which is called Work on What Has Been Spoiled, and which was changing to hexagram 41, Decrease. So yeah, that seems fitting. I hope you can tune in for that episode, and I thank you so much for listening to this one. Until next time, take care.